Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving headfirst into the massive billion-dollar world of longevity supplements, and we're going to focus on one of the biggest stars out there, NAD. It's been hyped up as this miracle molecule, a key to turning back the clock. But does the actual science back any of this up?
I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? This idea that you could just pop a pill and slow down or maybe even reverse aging itself. That is the huge promise behind the entire NAD industry. And today, we're going to follow the evidence step by step to see where it really leads.
All right, let's get right into it. To really get why there's so much hype, you first have to understand the promise. And it's a beautifully simple promise that launched, well, 1,000 different products. So at the very heart of this story is a molecule called NAD. Now think of your cells, all trillions of them, as these little factories. NAD, well, NAD is the electricity that powers all the machinery in those factories. It's absolutely essential for life. It helps turn the food you eat into the energy that runs, well, everything.
So here's the logic, and it's so simple it's sold millions of bottles. We know for a fact that as we get older, the amount of NAD in our body, especially in our tissues like our skin, goes down. So the hypothesis seems totally straightforward. If less NAD is a part of aging, then raising our NAD level should fight aging. It makes perfect sense on the surface, but is it actually true?
Now, to really trace the evidence, we have to figure out where all this excitement even came from. And you know, the story doesn't actually begin with NAD itself. It starts with this family of proteins called sirtuins.
You can think of sirtuins as your cell's own little maintenance crew. Their job is to run around fixing things, like repairing your DNA, which is obviously super important for fighting off age-related damage. But to do their job, this crew needs fuel. And what's that fuel? You guessed it, it's NAD. And here's a key detail. Sirtuins don't just use NAD for energy, they actually consume.
Okay, so the story kicks off back in the late 90s. Researchers found that if you boosted a sirtuin gene in simple baker's yeast, they lived longer. Super cool. Around the same time, we knew that caloric restriction, just eating less, also made yeast live longer. So this huge, powerful hypothesis was born. Caloric restriction must work by activating sirtuins. It all connected. But then, bam! In 2004, that beautiful idea fell apart. A critical study showed that if you did both, boosted sirtuins and calorically restricted the yeast, they lived even longer. It was an additive effect, which proved they were two totally separate pathways. Okay, so this is the absolute key point right here. The foundational idea, the thing that connected the sirtuin hype to caloric restriction, our best-known longevity trick, was just plain wrong. It was a misunderstanding. The science literally corrected itself almost 20 years ago, but that original story, it was just too good for the marketing to let go of.
So, to still believe the whole NAD story for longevity, you have to take what Dr. Peter Attia calls these giant leaps of faith. First, you have to believe that something that works in a single-celled organism like yeast is going to work the same way in a super complex mammal like us, a billion years of evolution later. That's a big leap. And leap number two, you have to assume that just because NAD levels go down with age, that forcing them back up is the answer. The thing is, your body keeps NAD in a very, very tight range for a reason, and we have zero evidence that artificially jacking it up actually solves the real problem.
So, if the original theory has some pretty big holes in it, how can we truly know if something extends life? Well, you can't rely on simple ideas. You need the most rigorous, most unbiased experiment you can possibly design.
And that experiment, folks, has a name. It's the Interventions Testing Program, or ITP. It's funded by the NIH, and it's basically the Supreme Court for longevity research. Its one and only job is to definitively test whether different molecules can actually make mammals live longer, period.
And the ITP is no joke. It is incredibly rigorous. For starters, the same experiment is run at the exact same time in 3 different independent labs, to make sure the results are real and not a fluke. And get this, they don't use those identical inbred lab mice. They use genetically diverse mice, which is a way, way better model for the genetic messiness of the human population. It is, without a doubt, the highest bar we have for this kind of research.
So the big moment, when the leading NAD precursor supplement, a little thing called nicotinamide riboside, or NR, was finally put through this gold standard test, what did the highest quality science we have actually find?
The results were, well, they were completely unambiguous. While another compound they've tested, called rapamycin, has consistently and powerfully extended lifespan in these tests, the NAD precursor, nicotinamide riboside, showed, Absolutely no effect. None. Zilch. No extension of life and no improvement in health span.
So let me just say that again so it really sinks in. When put to the ultimate test, our best, most robust, most unbiased scientific model for longevity that exists, the popular NAD precursor NR, did not make mice live one day longer or any healthier. It completely failed.
Okay, I can hear what you're thinking. Fine, that's mice. But what about us? What about the human trials? Aren't there studies that show benefits in people? And that's a really important question, because that's where a lot of the marketing claims you see come from.
So when you dig into the human data, you start to see this pattern emerge. Take a study on fatty liver disease. Sure, they found a small, statistically significant fat reduction in one specific subgroup of people. But was it clinically meaningful? Did it actually change their health? The answer is not really. Same thing for another study on glucose control with a different precursor called NMN. A tiny improvement that was technically real on paper, but in the real world, pretty much insignificant.
And honestly, this is a lesson you can apply to almost any health headline you ever read. You have to learn to never confuse statistical significance with clinical significance. Just because a result is real on paper, and probably not due to random chance, that doesn't mean it's big enough to actually matter one bit for your health.
Now, to be fair, there is one interesting little signal in all of this noise from the human data. A study did find that an NAD precursor cut the incidence of non-melanoma skin cancers by about 60%. That is genuinely intriguing, especially since our skin is where NAD levels drop the most as we age. But, and this is a big but, this is a very specific finding about a certain type of skin cancer. It is not a signal for overall longevity or reversing aging in general.
So, if the evidence for NAD supplements as some kind of fountain of youth has basically crumbled under real scientific scrutiny, where does that leave us? What should we be focusing on instead?
You know, it brings us all the way back to the most fundamental question of all. If you want to live a longer, healthier life, where should you invest your most valuable resources? Where should your time, your energy, and your money really go?
And I really don't think anyone has put it better than Dr. Peter Attia with this powerful analogy. He said that focusing on the big three, exercise, sleep, and nutrition, that's like worrying about the actual heading of the Titanic. But focusing on all this other stuff, these supplements like NAD, that's like worrying about whether they're serving lobster or steak in the dining room. One of those things has a monumental life-or-death impact on the outcome. And the other, well, it really doesn't.
And that's the final thought I really want to leave you with. When it comes to your health, to your longevity, the evidence is overwhelming about where the biggest levers are. So just take a second and look at your own efforts. Are you spending your precious energy focused on what's on the menu? Or are you focused on steering the ship?